Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 307. I'm the host, Kyle Anzalone. On today's show, Kieth Knight returns. He is the managing editor at the Libertarian Institute, and he has a brand new book out, a Voluntarist Handbook. It's absolutely fantastic. We go through and discuss several topics that go outside of the normal range of the show. You know, we do talk about the police here, but we go beyond that, talk about markets and, you know, just how in all the different ways government impacts our lives and what's the libertarian solution, the voluntarist take on all these different issues. So, fantastic book. Get it at the Libertarian Institute, where this show is hosted. As you all could tell, this is really a carryover conversation from our last one, and again, content is scaled back this week. So these will be the only two episodes, but there will be new coverage out, new episodes out next week. I'm sure I'll have a lot to say. So just be sure you're following me somewhere. The Twitter is at Kyle Anzalone _. Subscribe on YouTube, Rumble, or Odysee. The show is hosted at the Libertarian Institute. That means it's on the Libertarian Institute all podcast feed. So if you really want to keep up to date on all the foreign policy news, the Libertarian Institute has that with the Conflicts of Interest and the Scott Horton Show in one feed. You can also support the show by supporting our sponsor, Paloma Verde. PalomaVerdeCBD.com. Promo code PEACE. High quality CBD products. They got the lab test results right there on their website. Wide selection of products, even products for your dog. Everybody raves about their CBD dog treats helping out their pups. So you got a dog you really like. You need, help them to get around a little bit better. The treats that the dogs love them, and also, the owners love them because they see an improvement in their pups, a little bit happier of a dog. So PalomaVerdeCBD.com, promo code PEACE. Here's the episode. Hey, Kieth, welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. How you doing today?
Very well, Kyle. Thank you for having me.
Excited to have you back on, Kieth, especially since you have a new book out. I think it's actually the latest book for the Libertarian Institute. It came out just days after Scott's book. The Voluntarist Handbook, a collection of essays, excerpts, and quotes, organized by Kieth Knight. So, Kieth, tell me about it.
Well, what happened was I was reading Michael Malus's book, The Anarchist Handbook, and I thought it was such a great contribution to sort of the idea of people who were against hierarchy, as well as people who were in the libertarian sphere, kind of collecting their works. And I think his collection was from about the late 1800s up until about the year 2016. I realize that in our specific tradition, we have a long history going to about the 1850s. Of course, you can always, find someone in China writing in like the year 500. But when it comes to our libertarian tradition, people like Frederick Bastiat in the 1850s, and then people today like Scott Horton, Tom Woods, Lou Rockwell, Jeffrey Tucker, Ed Stringham, Stephen Kinsella, all these people are still carrying on this tradition. Sort of, I see them as sort of picking up any shortcomings that might have come with the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution. So I thought it was important to archive all of our best work and basically give people an introduction into our ideas, and me specifically. These were all the things I read that took me from being a progressive to being a libertarian. And just so people know what I'm talking about when I say voluntarism, I'm using the definition from Auburn Herbert, the founder of the idea, which he calls the moral position which maintains that no peaceful person can justly be submitted to the control of others in the absence of his or her own consent. So that's what we're talking about. This is a collection of 50 essays that I think makes the best case for libertarianism and voluntarism.
Yeah, so Kieth, this is absolutely fantastic, and I haven't read every last one of the essays you have here, but I did go through and read quite a few of the ones that caught my eye. You got Rothbard, Sheldon Richman, of course, is one of my favorites. I did enjoy Stephen Kinsella's article here, and of course, you got some Walter Williams. I mean, just an absolutely fantastic list. Also, Patrick McFarlane, one of a frequent guests of this show. So, you got a great list put together here and everything like that. Was it hard to whittle it down to these 50 essays, or what kind of was the process here? Did you like pit certain topics and then look for maybe different essays to fill them, or was it more the opposite where you had a whole bunch of essays and then you were just looking for ways to like group them into the book?
I think it was just starting with, who are the people that really convince me of the legitimacy of libertarianism? And I said, all right, here are the people. Now, what was it about them? Was it an article they wrote, an essay? Was it a quote of theirs? Was it just a few pages from an entire book? And that's sort of how I narrowed it down. So I first started with the person and then said, well, what was it about them that I like so much? And then I cut that and put them all into a book. One of the most difficult things was getting the copyright permissions, just because we're dealing with such a wide range of people here. Even though it's one philosophy, we got a lot of people coming at it from different starting points with different backgrounds.
Yeah. Well, Kieth, I feel like this book is coming out at an absolutely fantastic time because of what's happened recently in the Libertarian Party. There's a lot of people who previously felt alienated by the messaging of the Libertarian Party and that they could never be a libertarian on, with the current messaging. However, with the, new leadership of the Libertarian Party, there's a lot of people who are saying, what's going on over here? And this is something that I could get on board with. And so, do you see this as being something that we could hand out to people coming into the movement, or, just people flirting with the movement? And I know that most of the time, the idea behind a lot of the dissenters of the Mises caucus that has largely been behind the takeover of the Libertarian Party, the idea is that there's going to be a lot of people coming into the party from the right. But I have to tell you, Kieth, maybe it's because of my unique position in the libertarian movement, being a part of antiwar.com and mostly focusing on issues like the persecution of Julian Assange, wars, maybe drug wars and things like that. I have a lot of friends who are on the left, that really care about Medicare for all. But after they saw what happened with the lockdowns, I can at least say to them, now look, I'm not saying that the libertarians have the perfect solution to healthcare or anything like that. But, there seems to be a real problem here with the idea that just the government is going to take over or run healthcare. And they're kind of open to that. They see that, at least the government is being fallible enough now, even running domestic issues that, that they see problems with the Medicare for all issue. And so things like that are no longer deal breakers. And so do you think we hand this book out to some people on the left too? Or, who do you think our target audience is here, Kieth?
Everyone is the audience. That is the goal of this. So it's both people who have read us for a long time, like Tom Woods said that he enjoyed this book very much, and he's been in our sphere as long as almost anyone, as well as people who have really not heard of us. I want to be able to give them a book and say, look, there's 1,000 books and essays and podcasts I'd love you to listen to and watch. But if you could only do one, if there's just one thing I can tell you will be worth your time, it's this. So when you look at the table of contents, you'll find a number of people from the left. First of all, Frederick Bastiat was on the left in France in 1850. What I have are my favorite quotes from or what I thought are the most vitally important quotes from his book, The Law, published in 1850. We also have left libertarians such as Roderick T. Long. He writes one article that is, or this was actually a speech of his. He says, here are 10 responses to people who critique this idea of libertarian anarchism, a society without a state based on contract and private property. Another Roderick Long article is at the end. I believe it's titled How Government Solved the Healthcare Crisis. And he says, look, the promise in the 60s was, look, we need to take care of the poor there's two categories. We have people who can afford healthcare and people who can't. And with those people, we need Medicaid, and we also need something for the very high risk people that are high expense. So we also need Medicare. So we have not seen a decrease in the cost of healthcare since then. And in the 60s, you had drastic FDA expansion, not to mention Medicare Part D under George Bush, not to mention the Affordable Care Act under Barack Obama. And healthcare is worse than ever. So it's not like we try something, and if it doesn't, quote, work, whatever that allegedly means, then we go back to what it was before, or the politicians apologize, or they have to go to jail because they told us they would provide us with a service that never came about. Whereas in the private sector, you'd be charged with fraud, of course. So that is a clear-cut case of how someone on the left would appreciate this book. Also, Sheldon Richman, our colleague at the Libertarian Institute, identifies as a left libertarian. He has two articles, one about the vital importance of social cooperation. This is where we recognize that nothing we do is actually done by ourselves. Even right now, I'm talking into a microphone someone else made, into a computer that was made by other people. We're using, Skype, which was not made by the same person. So just right now, we're cooperating with tons of other people. Sheldon Richman says this cooperation is just inevitable. It's impossible to act without it. The fact that we're talking right now in a language we didn't invent is proof that we're constantly cooperating. So now the question is, not do we do things alone or do we do things together? The question is, are we going to achieve our ends peacefully through cooperation or coercively, where one group, namely the state, has the right to threaten people to do things and put them in jail if they resist. He also has a section titled One Moral Standard for All. So he says, this philosophy of ours, it sounds almost radical because we're kind of on, the opposite end of whatever's going on in the mainstream press. But if you take it from the standpoint of how we would view any other organization and what they have the right to do, all it really boils down to is we don't have any double standards for corporations, for other countries, for our countries, or for a group called government. We just see it as a different group of individuals. And that essay is almost like the biggest white pill, the most optimistic essay, because you say, as far as it seems, we're actually so close to getting people to grasp our worldview, so long as they lose this double standard. It's not like we have to convince them of education, healthcare, and agricultural subsidies and 50 other things. It's actually really only one thing we need to convince them of, and that's not to have a more double standard in morality. So this is a book for the left, the right, the minarchist, and the voluntarist as well.
Right. And Keith, so people could get the book on Amazon through the Libertarian Institute. And then also, if you're just giving away a digital copy of the book, and that's what I'm currently been using throughout this episode to kind of show people some of the things in your book, and it's available for free on Odysee. I will for sure put the link in the show notes page for people, although I will say, just to support Keith's work, it's definitely worth buying a copy. I was hoping to get one off you at Freedom Fest, Keith, so I could get it signed, but I guess I'll have to do that at a later date. By the way,
that was such a rookie author move. I mean, it's so clearly my first book. It didn't even occur to me to have copies on me for an event like that when we had our own booth. So I'm still learning. Go easy on me. But yes, you can order it on Amazon. It's free to download on Odysee. At least go to Odysee, check out the table of contents, see if anything grabs your interest. I really do summarize the book in 4 pages, the 2 introduction pages and the 2 pages in the afterword. So that should really give you, before, I'm sure money's tight with a lot of us spending quite a bit at the pump these days. So if you really want to make sure you're not wasting money or anything, read the first introduction pages and the afterword pages. That'll give you a summary of really what I'm trying to get at with the book here.
All right. So, Keith, the one thing that I think my audience will be most excited to read, will resonate most with them is essay number 24, Individualism versus War, by Scott Horton. And it's a essay from 2005. And so I'll let you tee it up here, Keith, but I'll note that, it was so great getting to hang out with not only you and Scott at Freedom Fest, but also to meet a ton of people who are really big fans of the Libertarian Institute. And so, this is one of our 8 books now that you've put out, Keith, and I'm sure you'll be adding to that number in the coming years. So go ahead and talk about Scott's essay here.
So the reason I chose this essay as opposed to anything else that Scott has produced is I felt like anyone around the world could read this article and learn something from it. It wasn't very specific to America and just about Iraq or just about the Bush administration. This is something that not only anyone in any country can relate to, but in 20, 40, 60 years, I think people will read this and still appreciate what it is about the war state that makes it so evil. A couple of quotes from here. So Scott wrote this in 2005. War is ultimately about collectivism. During crisis, individuality fades in favor of team effort. During violent conflict, particularly between governments, the world becomes, especially it seems for Americans, a giant bloody football game. Our team versus theirs. Us versus them. Good versus evil. Go team go. So he's emphasizing that there is nothing about let's make sure to discriminate between the guilty people and the innocent people. We really do look at it as sort of like a team. And in my lifetime alone, I'm trying to think, I really don't think I heard anything, before 9/11. So starting with that, the great boogeymen of the world were North Korea, Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, Saddam Hussein, and Iraq, Iran, Saudi Arabia for a little bit, and there was Hezbollah in Iran. Now Putin is the great threat. And of course, they always throw in the Japanese and the Germans to sort of create a historical narrative that look at the great things war can achieve. We did it against the Japs. We did it against the Germans. Now we're going to do it in the Middle East. So this is constantly what's happening. It's never about just as if there were a crime that took place domestically, you wouldn't say, well, Arizona attacked California, therefore we need to bomb Arizona. And for the same reason, we shouldn't be doing this to other countries. Scott goes on. He says, in George Orwell's nightmarish dystopia, 1984, the world is divided into 3 empires in a state of perpetual warfare because the consciousness of being at war and therefore in danger makes the handing over of all power to a small caste seem the natural, unavoidable condition of survival. Every so often, a bomb falls on the lower class neighborhoods and kills enough people to remind them that they are at war and they need Big Brother to protect them. He uses the term that Chris Hedges uses. Collective self-worship is something that happens in wartime. Now, this leads to a statement that's often attributed to Randolph Bourne, where he says that war is the health of the state. So if a state wants to grow, simply by declaring war on the rich or the Muslims or any entity, they could sort of declare war on. And they get people so scared that they're much more willing to give up rights that they would have seen as inalienable in the absence of this terrible, unavoidable threat. So if you scare people enough, you can get a ton of power you otherwise wouldn't have been able to get. What I think people are going to learn from this book overall, as well as this section, is also that the state is the health of war, meaning that when it comes to waging war, there's a number of attributes that governments have that are unique to it that make war much more likely to happen than it otherwise would. First of all, the ability to tax. So if I have to acquire all of my money voluntarily, I can't get any money unless I have a good reputation and people are willing to trade with me or give it to me. well, I'm going to be more frugal in how I spend that money. But if I have the ability to take money by force, well, then I'm going to be much more likely to spend it unwisely and on things that are not necessarily beneficial, and they increase my social status at the expense of others. Second thing is having a central bank, which allows you to increase the money supply where you don't even have to tax and show people that they're actually having to bear the cost. You can print the money, so to speak, by getting the Federal Reserve to increase the money supply. So that is another thing that makes war much more likely than it otherwise would be in the absence of a state. The third thing is a lot of militaries have the ability to conscript. I know there's still selective service in America from 18 to 25. I read a number of reports from USA Today that Zelensky's government is not allowing men ages. I want to say I read 18 to 50 are not allowed to leave Ukraine. Not sure if Russia has conscription. Do you know if Russia has conscription?
I'm not certain on that. I know that Zelensky has even tightened down more, and now you're not allowed to leave like your city without talking with the local recruitment board to make sure nobody's trying to get out of serving in the Ukrainian military. I believe Russia does have conscripts, though.
Unbelievable. This is one of the most terrible forms of forced labor. It's just so traumatizing, and it could be for a regime that you absolutely despise. So maybe it's a bunch of Yanukovych supporters who are saying, "Well, I got to fight for this regime. I did everything I could to not have it in the first place." So, okay, either way, that's the third point. If I don't have to convince people to fight this battle voluntarily, well, is it that big of a threat to them? Maybe it is, and maybe they're just so stupid and they don't understand the greater good of society. But do I still have the right to force them to do so? So governments having the ability to conscript people against their will to fight these wars makes the wars more likely. The final reason that the state is the health of war is because generally the state is the organization in society which has the right to do things that no other organization has the right to do, namely initiate aggression against peaceful people. So if you saw the collateral murder video, for instance, that Julian Assange heroically leaked along with Chelsea Manning, if you saw that and it was done by Walmart or the Red Cross or the Catholic Church or me, I think anyone would say that's like the most evil thing, and I hope that bastard gets like 1,000 years in prison. However, when this video came out, a lot of people said whoever showed us this video should be put in jail, and whoever leaked it should be put in jail. What this is a blatant moral double standard that people in society have for government actors that they don't have for everyone else. So those are the four main reasons we have to believe that if we're against war and how destabilizing it, all the suffering it causes, all the unnecessary resources allocated, all the murder, all the forced labor. If we're against those things, one of the major institutions we need to be against is the concept of a state. A few more things on Scott Horton's article here. He mentions at the very end, he says, Hedges, referring to the book he's summarizing, says that if you add it all up, there have only been 99 years of recorded human history where there was not a war going on somewhere. So our odds aren't that great, it's true. But the supposed usefulness of war has been shown to be false time and time again. Invasion is no way to obtain resources. It costs much less to simply pay for what is needed. And that is the great achievement of free markets and the ability for people to recognize property rights and exchange. So historically, I mean, 1600s, the year 1200, the more you keep going back, the only way to amass great wealth was to plunder it, was to take it from someone else. Just as animals who don't have the ability to produce will just eat the other to stay alive themselves. What's great about the market economy is it allows me to succeed only if I produce something that other people want and voluntarily purchase. So if we really care about there being peace on Earth, I think the state is the great enemy, which we need to get rid of. And by get rid of, I'm not talking about turn the White House into a spirit Halloween store. That's one of my favorite memes ever. Well, but simply what I'm saying is changing public opinion in such a way to where people don't have a double standard for things that are done by citizens or police officers or politicians. And the cult of collectivism, I think, really seeing people not as individuals, just like you or I, but as members of any group that we could potentially be at war with, a criteria decided by a bunch of politicians who have the worst record of anyone in the country, is so vitally dangerous. And you can see how the media is constantly playing with our minds on this. I mean, I thought we should have been hearing about, the Taliban still or Al Qaeda more than ever, and we don't hear about them. We don't hear about Assad anymore. They've dropped that. They've dropped the Putin's killing soldiers with bounties on their heads in Afghanistan, and they just keep moving on to something else. It's so dangerous to have this state because at any point, this terrible nuclear power at this point could be wielded and cause so much death and destruction. So, yeah, Scott's article is terrific.
All right, Keith. So when it comes to libertarians and foreign policy, it's very easy to just say, oh, libertarians are all good on war, which is mostly true. However, there is this weird segment of libertarians who, I was at Reno for the Libertarian Party convention, and the candidates who were running against people like Angela McArdle and Josh Smith or Eric Rossep were saying things like, we envision a world set free in our lifetimes, which to me sounds like a George W. Bush like dystopia, right? Like they're gonna, free the world in our lifetimes. What are you going to have to do to make that happen? However, it's not actually, I think, that far outside of what some libertarians think, particularly when you look at communist governments, right? Where nobody is calling for the U.S. to overthrow the Saudi monarchy or the Israeli apartheid government or any number of, right-wing states supported by the U.S. But when it comes to the Chinese Communist Party, when it comes to the Cuban government or the Venezuelan government, then there seems to be a group of libertarians who are okay with it because it's a communist government. And so, I guess, based on your voluntarist handbook, where do you come down on this, Keith?
And the question is whether I'm optimistic about the future or whether we should be friends with these regimes. Can you narrow that down for me?
I guess the question would be, as libertarian thought goes, would libertarians support like trying to overthrow communist regimes in other countries? Because there are some libertarians who do want to overthrow like the Cuban government, or at least support in some ways overthrowing it. But as far as like the libertarian position goes, what says Kieth Knight?
No, the reason that would not be something that would be on the libertarian agenda is simply because overthrowing is usually an act of people assuming that they delegate this right to the state to go and remove the current regime and install another one, killing tons of civilians in the meantime, forming blockades, killing a lot of civilians in the meantime, and never changing public opinion. So by the time they do usher in their Juan Guaido, I forget what the Venezuela guy's name, but they tried so hard. And then the poor guy's getting thrown out of a restaurant. People are throwing beets at his head. Because if you don't change public opinion, then it'll be just like, Bashar al-Assad coming to America and declaring himself king. No one would recognize it. So, no, we certainly wouldn't support that. Now, when it comes to the principle of, are those still illegitimate governments we should argue against, we should tell people that their government is just as illegitimate. Well, just because we are in a different country or we don't know them, we still need to have this principle unapologetically. So even if someone is in a different race than me, or they're a different race than I am, so I just need to worry about my own race, No, that is just an arbitrary divide, and we need to not have those arbitrary divides when we're talking about such a vitally important principle. So we need to both say it's not just the U.S. government that's evil; it's all of these governments in the past. So we're drawing a strict connection between, because if it's just the current U.S. politicians, well, then we just need regime change in America, and then everything else will fall into place. But when it comes to Mao, Stalin, Pol Pot, Hitler, people like Idi Amin, Genghis Khan, all of the atrocities throughout the past. Kaiser Wilhelm killing tons of people in France, and all these terrible atrocities. Um, we still have to have a consistent principle, but to actively advocate overthrowing the government is not necessarily the right approach. It should just be changing public opinion worldwide. And because they're geographically closer, it would be much more on them because they would have to deal with the results of whatever happened after the fall of that regime. But it's important that just because we don't know them or they're not really part of us, what Rothbard says in chapter 13, War, Peace, and the State, he makes this case that, well, imagine person A is assaulting or raping or in the process of murdering or kidnapping person B, but you actually don't know any of them. Are you going to interfere or are you just going to mind your own business? Well, in this case, the interference is done by the person initiating violence, and you are just using the right of self-defense for another person. So whether it's your neighbor or someone 20,000 miles away, don't know how big the earth is, or someone very far away, we should still have this same principle because it's not limited to gender, age, race, nationality, time. These are universal principles we're talking about. So, no, we shouldn't advocate any government intervention. Yes, we should advocate any voluntary organization around the world that is stopping people from initiating violence against other peaceful people.
Right. A very good point, Keith. And thank you so much for coming on the show today to talk about your book. We are going to do another interview going into some of the other subjects other than foreign policy. But, me and my show, I had to have you on to talk about that one subject first. Keith, tell people where they could find your book and, how they could support your work, everything else you do, anything you want to plug. Go ahead.
You can find me at libertarianinstitute.org. The book is on Amazon and it's on Odysee. Those are the primary places to find my work. Thank you, Kyle.
Thank you so much, Keith.